episode, join me and Prakash going behind his product. You will discover how he imagined, built and launched Xano, a game-changing tool for entrepreneurs and creators. Xano allows them to build powerful and scalable backends for application and web platforms without a single line of code. When most no-code tool focuses on front-end and simple use cases, Xano's focus on where the difficulty is, the backend, the API and the databases. Prakash is one of the most skilled people I know when it comes to building a product. I'd been lucky to work with him a few years ago. He teaches me so much. I'm still amazed when listening to him speaking about his previous experiences at Google, his vision for Xano, and his methodology to develop a killer product. So without further ado, let's welcome Prakash.
So they keep changing the name of Google's enterprise product offering. Right now it's called Workspaces. Okay. But at the time, it was called Google for Enterprise or Google for Work, and then it became G Suite, so it's changed a lot. But I was basically the head of design and research while I was over there. And I was at Google for about 8.5 years. And I learned a lot over there. I started off as just kind of a sole user experience designer. So all of my experience is around user-centered design and human-computer interaction. And then afterwards, I left and I took a year off, and that's when I lived in France. And then when I came back, I decided to start an entrepreneurial journey, and I did my first startup. And I always call that 3.5 years of me getting the crap kicked out of myself, just because I learned so many lessons on the things not to do when you are building a business. And then after that startup experience, I consulted for a while for actually a couple of years with all different types of startups, from very small, like seed startups, all the way to large, like, Fortune 500 product companies. And I also learned a lot about what it takes to grow and scale product and product teams. And now with Xano, which is the product that I'm currently working on, I've basically taken the culmination of all of my experience and poured it into this. And I'm sure we'll talk about Xano later, but that's just a little bit about me and my background.
That's 99% sure that we're going to speak about Xano. But something that I want to ask you just before, how did you end up at Google and how did you end up working there? Because, Google is always fascinating, for like young engineers. It's probably like, the place you want to go when you're a young engineer. So how did you end up working at Google, and what was a bit your journey at Google?
Yeah. So, I would consider myself pretty lucky in the way that I got into Google. We actually came in through an acquisition. I worked at a company called Picasa as a visual designer. So I didn't really know anything about user experience design at the time. I had just worked in Photoshop and was designing the user interface for Picasa. And for those of you that don't know what Picasa is, it basically is a photo organization tool that eventually evolved into Google Photos. And so at the time, I came in through an amazing designer, Robert Bailey. He was the lead visual designer, user experience designer at Picasa. I started working there right out of college, and within basically 8 months, we were acquired by Google. I will say we still had to go through 6 rounds of interviews, and not everyone made it into Google, but that's basically how I got into Google. And then when I joined Google, that's really when I started learning the differences between visual design and user experience design.
Okay. And what was like, I assume this is one of your biggest learning, the difference between visual and experience design. But what are like the top 3 things that you learned at Google that like completely change your way of seeing like internet and the way we develop product?
Yeah, I think that, well, first and foremost, as a visual designer, you're very much focused on how things look, but not necessarily on how they act to the user or the audience that you're designing for. And so, user experience design is all about really presenting basically an experience for a user or a set of users and helping them be successful in that experience in the most delightful and the quickest way possible. And visual design, as you know, is just completely different from that. It's just like, how can I add more shading to this? How can I add more shadow and bezel and things of that nature? And so, I think that my time at Google was really this journey around understanding users and their needs, and also understanding that the interfaces that we were creating at Google was not for one type of user. It was for many types of users. And so as a result, you had to design something that was very accessible, and you had to really abstract away the complexity of some of the power that Google's apps were presenting to people. So I think that was probably the biggest lesson around really user-centered design, abstracting away complexity, and also understanding the responsibility that you had as a user experience designer at Google, that when you launch something, you're launching to millions of people, and they're really using your products to get work and to kind of be more productive in life.
Okay. And at Google, it's also where like you met your co-founder, Sean. Correct me if I'm wrong, but
yeah, no, Sean and I luckily were friends before Google. In fact, I think he would credit himself with getting me the job at Picasa, because he introduced me to all of the people there. But Sean and I actually had been best friends since really the age of 12 or 13 years old. We actually met before the internet. We met online playing video games. And so we were just very close friends. And we actually started a web design business very early on in life. And then so when we both got to Google together, we went our separate ways in the same company. I took the user experience design route, and he took the engineering route. And a lot of people don't know this, but Sean was one of the lead DevOps for Google Photos. So it started with the server on his desk and really dictated the platform that basically has scaled to what is Google Photos today. I think when he left, it was 5,000 servers from the server on his desk. So he's basically, he's the engineering side. I'm the product user experience side. It's a really complementary match.
Yeah, sure. And so you guys left Google and you launched a company together called Xano.
That's right.
When did you launch Xano exactly?
So Xano actually started as an internal tool, and this was before I joined Xano as an organization, but this is a little bit of Sean's journey. But when he basically, after he left Google, started an agency, an app development agency, and he ran that for, almost more than a decade. And while he was building all of these different types of applications, he saw that you're building the same things over and over by way of the back end and the type of capabilities. So he built the first version of Xano as an internal tool to basically develop applications faster without having to grow the team, because that's what it's about, right? When you're running a business, you want to keep your team size small and your output high as an agency, especially. So after, several iterations, Xano had gotten so good as a command line tool that I said, look, we really need to work on productizing this and bringing this to the world. And so almost about 2.5 years ago, I loosely started getting involved in helping transform Xano from a command line tool to basically a product, right? Putting a user interface on it. And while this was happening, this movement of the no-code movement started really getting traction. So we really launched at the right time, and we launched the product to the public in January of this year. But I only tell you that story because it was a really long time in the making. To make a no-code backend as comprehensive as ours took years and years of work to get right.
Yeah. Maybe can you pitch Xano for the people that listen to us, because we speak about like backend, no-code tools and stuff like that. So Xano is basically a tool that helps you to build backend and all the tech infrastructure behind the product quicker than anyone else. Is that right? Yeah,
that's right. And let me just take a step back and maybe describe for the audience just how software is developed today, and then I'll kind of talk about where Xano fits in. So typically when you're building web applications or software on the web or mobile apps, there are always two parts. There's the front end and the back end. The front end is what the user interacts with, and the back end handles all of the business logic and API endpoints and background tasks and things of that nature. The best way to think about it is Amazon's one-click buy. So on the front end, you might see a button that says buy now, right? A simple button. But when you click that button, You have to check on the back end whether the payment is valid. You have to check whether there's inventory. You have to check distribution centers. There are so many things that need to happen behind the scenes that a back end handles. And traditionally, what has happened is the back end has been built by a team of engineers, right? Because it's hard to get right. There's not only writing all of the business logic associated with what I just was talking about, but there's also scalability. Like maybe doing a one-click buy for one person is okay, but how do you do that to millions of people? So we basically have taken all of that complexity, scalability, building the business logic, and put it in a no-code box to where now people are able to create these comprehensive backends without the need to know how to code and without the need to know how to scale or anything like that. So that's basically the space that we're playing in. Before there was a lot of no-code front ends out there, and you might have heard of some of them like Bubble or even Webflow. That's definitely considered a front end, but no tool had really been created for the back end. And we like to say that we are the first Turing complete no code backend, which means anything that you can articulate in a programming language, you can do within Xano without code. So the one sentence pitch, our H1, we like to say we're the fastest way to build a powerful, scalable backend for your application without using any code.
Okay. And so this Xano, so it started as like a Sean side project. So Sean was basically building and tinkering these things on the side to making gain some time while developing product for other companies. And so he got like a pretty, I think, decent product, but it was all command line, all for engineer, but it was a tool for engineer.
That's right.
When you decided to join the adventure, join Xano, how long did it take you to go from this like command line tool, Xano code, we'll call it like that, to the Xano that actual user can use, like people like your target user, so people that are no coder and that wants to build the backend. How long did it take you for that?
Yeah, I mean, you could make the argument that we're still on that journey, but basically,
come on, you officially launched like in January, so
yeah, but and I think this is something that's important for your audience. It's not like you launch and your work is done. It's an iterative process, sure. And so I would say the from the command line to something that was actually usable was probably a year and a half, and that was all part-time work, not full-time, because we all had to have side jobs to basically. We had to have side jobs to basically keep the money flowing in. So about a year and a half, maybe even 2 years, it took to get to that point to where we could launch in January. And then since then, we've been iterating and evolving the product and making it better and better.
Yeah, for sure. Like developing a product is a never ending journey. Like you always like continue to iterate and stuff like that. Like Google, we were speaking about Google before, but Google is the best example. They've been around for 20 years and the product still evolves.
Absolutely.
So it took us like 1 year and a half, 2 years. What was a bit the process to go from this command line tool to an actual like platform that people can use to build their backend? What's a bit the process? I imagine that at the beginning you had like a kind of a design phases where you were drafting the stuff, or what's your process and what's the recipe that you use to build Xano? And I imagine that now you can tell the recipe, but when you started, you were not really knowing where you go,
That's exactly right. I think the hardest thing that we faced was trying to abstract away the complexity of what it takes to build a backend. And if you abstract it away, you really have a couple different components. You have the server, right, which basically powers your application and makes things slow or fast. You have the database, which is the heart of your application where you store all of the data. And then you have the API, which is basically the messenger that runs back and forth from your front end or other services to your back end. And being able to design an interface that, number one, made that accessible to people, especially people that had really never coded before. And number two, a interface that allowed them to understand the business logic that tied into that world was very difficult. So you're right. There was a lot of iteration around design, hours and hours and hours of brainstorming and conversation about the best way to approach things that we would make easy for the user and things that we would leave the same. I'll give you an example. One thing that we made a very clear decision on was, you'll see a lot of these no-code tools today. They basically abstract away the nomenclature of back-end development. I'll just use a simple example like Zapier. Zapier is an amazing tool, but they might call it a Zap or a workflow, right? But if you don't have a Zap or a workflow for what you need to build, and you don't know anything about APIs, well, you're kind of stuck. So our philosophy has always been, we're going to educate the users on what an API is and how to build one using that same nomenclature and language so they can create it for themselves. Now, as you said, looking backwards, that's an easy decision that I can say. But at the beginning, when everyone was saying that was the wrong decision, and we were even knocking our heads on the wall like, hey, we shouldn't call it an API, we should call it something different. These were the tough challenges that we had to go through in the very beginning.
So educating your user actually took you a bit of, like, a lot of time in the process of building the product. Like, basically you were building a product and not just like helping them to develop an API. You were also educate them on like what's an API, what's a backend and everything. So basically Xano turns normal users into like powerful backend coder, not backend coder, but backend developers, you know. So they need to understand all those concepts.
Exactly. You know, the education is such a key component and a core philosophy or tenet in what we do at Xano. And that's why you see, if you go to our YouTube channel or even in our documentation, we've already published over 100 videos, even small videos, on how to do simple things. And we hear time and time again from users, you know, I didn't even know what an API was before I came to Xano, and now you've taught me what it is and its role in the back end, and I feel empowered to do so much more with the app I want to build. So that's really important. And another piece of this that we actually believed in early on, and this is what I learned from my previous startup and my consulting work, was the importance of data and analytics. Like, we basically, from the very beginning, set up, you know, segment and mix panel so we could look at user behavior, where they were clicking, where they were having trouble, where they weren't clicking, so we could use that to inform what we did in the product. And we still continue to do that today. So the understanding what users are doing through data and educating them through tools like, or through content in YouTube and Twitter, those kind of go hand in hand.
Yeah, sure. I was about to ask you, like, what are your best, like, what are the main tools that you use in this journey? Like, I assume that you also use the tool for wireframing and designing the product. So you spoke about mix panel, so mix panel, segment. Do you have like other tools that you use during this journey?
Yeah, so I would say, starting from design, I've always been an Adobe XD fan. I know people like on the executive team there, they're a wonderful team that's like really passionate about design and making it easy for UX designers and beyond. So I use Adobe XD for that, but I would recommend XD or Figma to anyone to start with design. Then beyond that, in terms of our stack, I can just kind of go from, you know, top of funnel inward. So, you know, we use Google Analytics, obviously, like most people do, sure, to measure website performance. And that is associated with like Google Tag Manager and Optimize in Google Search Console to really understand what users are searching when they come to find us, and then run experiments on the homepage. Then from there, we use Segment as our middleware data layer to basically connect everything together. So all the data we're getting from Google Analytics, we pass through Segment, and then we use Mixpanel to basically run reports on the behavior of what's going on in the app. And we also use Hotjar, and I know there's Full Story as well, but that's a little more expensive. We use Hotjar and Mixpanel together to understand behavior within the app as well. And then we use intercom to communicate with our customers, and customer IO for our email delivery service. So all of these tools together have really helped us paint a really clear picture of what our users are doing, and it has allowed us to communicate with them in a meaningful way. I'll say that if anyone hasn't heard of these tools or is going to sign up for them, almost every single one of them offer a startup pricing. So definitely just type in startup pricing Mixpanel or intercom, and you'll get 90% off for your first year. So I highly recommend doing that. And the last thing that I'll say is Loom. Like, you've probably used Loom before, Morgan. Yeah. Like, we use it all of the time, not only to pass ideas to our customers, but also pass ideas to each other. So those are some of the tools that we use within Xano.
Yeah. I personally switched from Loom to Tela. I don't know if you know Tela.
I've not heard of that before.
It's pretty good tool. They launched I think 6 months ago or something like that. It's pretty good tool.
Okay.
But I want to go back to these tools and stuff like that, because you highlight something that is super interesting, is that your customer understanding starts by what people are searching. Because most of the person that develop the product, they focus on their user, and they focus really on when the user is almost already a client, But you guys go far before that to understand what really bring the clients, bring the customer, bring the user into your platform, so you can make the best product for them. This is very interesting, because I'm not too sure product developers use Google Analytics, to be honest. Most of the people using Google Analytics it's for ads or for more marketing people, But you guys use that as an engineering purpose, a product purpose, which is absolutely amazing.
Yes, I think that this is a discipline that most product people need to learn. So we always talk, or you probably hear about the customer journey, and your customer journey doesn't start in your website, in your app. It starts when they first hear about you, or even before that, when they first have the problem that might cause them to search for a tool like you, right? And so understanding how to measure what success looks like across the customer journey, from acquisition to conversion to revenue, is very, very important. And so if you're a product person and you aren't familiar with Google Analytics, I highly recommend that you do so. And there's so many wonderful people out there that know it well, that are willing to maybe, sit down with you for 30 minutes and show you the basics. I'd recommend doing that. And so to your point, Morgan, this is something that we're still trying to do well, but typically before people come to Xano, they're trying to solve a problem for themselves. They're not looking for Xano, right? They're trying to build an application. And we now know that they don't come to Xano directly. What they usually do is they'll start in something like Airtable or AppSheet, right, to use as their database. And then they'll run into some sort of limitation, whether that be a record limitation or a capabilities limitation. And then they look for something else, right? And that is where we capture them. And so we often say that users graduate into Xano from a tool like Airtable and AppSheet. So obviously the way that we position our marketing copy or position what we put in front of those users very much changes knowing that piece of information. So if you're building a product out there and you don't know what users are searching for in order to get to you, that is something that you should absolutely do. And with tools like Google Search Console and Analytics, they make it really easy for you to do so.
Okay. And do you guys have a marketing team, or are you still taking care of that yourself?
Still taking care of that for ourselves. And I think, in the early days, you basically have to wear many, many hats. That being said, we've hired consultants to help us. So in this early stage, it's almost better to hire in these consultants to either help you get set up or help you reach a milestone, because they're very milestone driven, and then they'll leave you and they'll go to their next client. I recommend that people do this in the early stages rather than bringing on a full-time person, because especially when you're doing so many things, you'll have a very specific need, and bringing on a full-time person, unless you have a full-time amount of work for them to do, it's just a lot to try to manage someone and say, okay, well, now that you've done this project, what are you going to do next? So it's usually better to do it piecemeal, and that's worked really well for us.
Okay, interesting. But I think it's also part of your product development strategy to run the marketing yourself, because you are as you said, like your copywriting change based on what you learn from your user and stuff like that. So I think both are very linked, and the fact that you guys can manage all of that by yourself, it's absolutely amazing. How many people are you now at Xano?
We are in total five people.
What?
Yeah, I know.
Okay, I thought like you were like probably like 15 or 20.
Yeah, people think that we're much bigger than we are, but we're not.
But that's a good point. Like this quote, make 10 people looking like a 100-person army.
Yeah, no,
this is a bit the story of Xano.
Yeah, no, we're servicing thousands of users right now. We're a 5-person team. And it forces you to be as efficient as possible, and also make sure that you're bringing on the best people possible. Because when you have that type of discipline, and you learn this over time, you can get a lot done with a small team.
Yeah, for sure. And you were speaking about Loom before.
Yep.
I assume that you guys are like running customer interviews. Do you have a process for that? Like, how do you do it? It's just like a casual chat with your user, or you have like a framework that you built based on your experience? What's a bit your process on that?
Yeah, so we're constantly basically talking to our customers, and we do this because we have multiple sessions throughout the week that we call orientation and office hours. So when you sign up for our product, on the dashboard, we actually give you money, like Xano credit, to come to orientation, because we know that if we can get you an orientation and help you be successful using the product, that you'll stick around longer. And so orientation, basically we see new users every single week, multiple times a week. Then we have office hours twice a week, where if you're building an app or a backend and you need help with something, you can come to office hours. And the wonderful thing about office hours is they are not only getting a chance to meet the team, and by the way, they think we're celebrities just because we're like the CEO or CPO and we're on these calls, but they get to meet each other and help each other, right? And they'll stick around even after their question is answered, because they love hearing the problems that other people are solving. So I think our product is unique because you can build any type of product, but even if you have a very focused product like Loom, for example, I think it's really important to try to, at least on 2 times a week, at the very minimum, you should be talking to a customer, seeing how they talk about your product, seeing what struggles they're faced with, and that'll really just inform how you can do better and evolve to the next level.
Yeah, imagine. What are your best memories about like stories of like users, or like what they achieve, or someone coming back to you and says like, okay, you saved my life because this and this? Do you have like a special memories already, like some special memories about that, and cool stories from your user?
Yeah, it's still relatively early for us, but I mean, even just today, we had a user write us and say that they are the tool that they wish they had found years ago, and we've basically saved them. We're going to be saving them, tens of thousands of dollars. And we hear this all the time, like, you have saved me, or you're going to save me tens of thousands of dollars because now I'm empowered to build this on my own. I love also seeing the applications that people build. We're actually partnered with this organization called On Deck, and they have a no-code fellowship, and we have tons of people that are building their real-world applications in Xano, and they're doing it within 2 weeks, these fully functional, comprehensive backends, which just was not possible before. So when you know that you are empowering and giving people a platform to express their ideas and to produce innovation in the world, I mean, there's no greater feeling than that, and we're just getting started.
Yeah, for sure. I've got actually one of my friends that was working at Undeck, Lorenzo, if you listen to us. He's in this, I don't know if he's in the no-code fellowship, but he do like, he's a no-code developer for Undeck. So use Xano.
Yeah, wonderful. Lorenzo, if you're listening, I think, was he in the last cohort? I think I remember him. Anyways, Lorenzo, if you're listening, hello.
Lorenzo Castro.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's absolutely amazing. And okay, interesting. From like, so you guys officially launched in January 2021, but you had some version before in beta test. I can tell that because I tried one before.
Yes, we did. Access.
So how many version did you guys launch? Like you had these beta phases. So what's a bit your rate of iteration? You know, for example, like a company like GitLab release like, I think 12 version of the product per year. So, almost one per month. What's a bit your rate of like iteration on the product?
Yeah. I mean, so the reality is we launch something every other day. And we launch multiple times a week and a month. And you can see we have like now a change log in our documentation, but we do major updates to everyone. And that's another tool we use. We use Olvi to update our entire user base around what's new. But we're constantly improving the product. So when you, I think, came on board, we were in very early access. I want to, maybe that was in November or something like that. And that was really just letting select
maybe
people.
Before, I think it was September, October, something like that.
Yeah, so we just let a select group of people in that we knew were a little bit more technical and were a little more forgiving. You know, so you're a friend of the family, Morgan. That's why we let you in. But yeah, you know, we wanted to we didn't let everyone in because we wanted to make sure that they were going to really use the product and give us feedback. And so we just kept iterating from there. And then January, we felt like we were finally at a place where we had knocked out a lot of the early bugs. And most importantly, that we could start taking payments. And then that's when we launched more broadly. But even since January, the product is completely transformed because we are constantly pushing new releases. Like we just pushed one this morning and another one yesterday as well.
Yeah. So you guys like push like continuous like improvement all along the way. So you don't have, so you basically build this version that was like pretty stable, because when I tried it in like September, October, it was already like very decent, you know, in terms of usage and stuff like that. So when you build this stuff, which basically like no user really touched, I think before, you just build based on your intuition. And then from that, you like get more and more user to test and try. And so you already have like a product that is, that already have like good foundation. And then you do small iteration and small fix and small improvement on the go. Is that your process a bit about product development?
You know, I think, and one thing that you probably noticed early is we created a landing page with the early access sign up that you put in your email. So even if you have no product, that gives you a sense of are people searching for you, or are they having a problem that drives them or compels them to that landing page? And even furthermore, that compels them to put in their email address. So that really helped us because we got a good sense of the types of users that were signing up for Xano even before we let them in. And then as we started letting them in, you're exactly right. Just like iteration and iteration, and then reaching out to them and asking if they would hop on calls and, you know, tell us a little bit about their experience and what they're building. So we literally have a folder in the early days. I think this was before we were, we even had like a enterprise version of Zoom. I think we had like the free version and we'd do the 40-minute calls.
45-minute cut.
45-minute, exactly. And we would just, we would do these calls with people and record it to our local folder. So I have like literally hundreds of interviews with people, just trying to get a better understanding of how they use the product and, you know, what they liked and what they hated about it. And that still continues to happen to this day. You know, we still book meetings, we record our office hours and orientations, we look for patterns, and that will, to be honest, never stop. We will always do that because there's always more stuff to learn.
Yeah, and you are like absolutely customer obsessed. So. And
yes.
And so just like about this recording, do you like transcript or do you highlight some certain stuff and put them into like a Airtable, a Google Sheet or whatever to have like some, because with this data that you have in video, how do you like crawl it to go back and like maybe make metrics or like, and how do you analyze all that data? Because it's like qualitative data that you get, but not quantitative, So do you have like, do you process that with like ranking or stuff like that?
Yeah, so we sometimes will use clips from office hours or meetings that we have to inform feature requests that we get, right? And we use Monday.com for our project management, and we use Grain to basically take clips from Zoom, and it automatically transcribes and makes it really easy to paste those links in Monday. So I think the qualitative data helps because it helps reinforce whether we're building the right thing. Sometimes we don't do that just because we're such a small team and we're all on these calls together. We have a pretty good handle on what the big requests and problems are. But we've definitely done that before. And certainly for testimonials, like, just internally, we love basically having like this archive of all of these people that are just saying, we really think you're onto something. You're changing the way that people, engineer software. It's pretty amazing.
Okay. And something that I want to speak to you about is that before we spoke about like this no-code trend and everything. Obviously, you guys didn't wait the no-code wave to launch. You guys were like already kind of like building this, and like Sean built this command line, Xano command line tool before. What are like the signals and the small stuff that you saw that were like, okay, we need to transform that? Is that already stuff happening on the market? It's all based on your intuition. How did you materialize that? What was a bit the process to like, let's say like, okay, we have this powerful tool we want to launch, because obviously I'm pretty sure that you didn't win the wave to catch it. But what was a bit your process?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I think that when we we had this internal version of Xano, and when we were deciding to productize it, we actually weren't sure whether we were going to be in the no-code space. I think that our intuition was to be something closer to like Hasura, or something where it's like low code, or you're using code alongside basically a framework generator. I think that once we saw the writing on the wall, and I listen to so many podcasts and I try to keep my finger on the pulse of where the industry is going. And when I kind of like introspected, if I projected out 5 to 10 years, do I think that we're going to have more engineers building, or do I think that we're going to have more entrepreneurs with the ability to build using no-code tools? And I would say it was the latter. And I think that we're seeing that already. And so at the time when Sean and I sat down and talked about this with our third co-founder, Jack, we're like, listen, I think that it needs to be no code, completely no code or nothing, because it needs to be accessible to everyone. We can teach them the concepts, we can abstract away the complexity, but that's an important tenet for us. And because of that reason, we delayed our launch, and it took longer to get out the door, but I think it was the right decision.
Okay. Prakash, you can do the interview by yourself, because I was about to ask you, like, what's the future of your market in 10 years? So you already replied this question. So yeah, you truly believe that we will have more engineers building things, more entrepreneurs building things that the future is like empowering entrepreneurs and like all this like creator economy also building like a product and building things by themselves.
Oh, totally. I mean, if you think about it, like, let's just think about Squarespace for a minute, okay?
Yeah.
My father-in-law, who's in his 60s, uses Squarespace by himself to build a website. He's a flight instructor. He teaches pilots. He maintains that by himself. They can book through the website. He takes payment via Stripe, and he does this 100% on his own. He's not an engineer, but
on his own. 65 years old. Crazy.
And Squarespace has enabled him to do this. And so now when you go to build a website, people almost think like, well, why would you ever hand code a website? You could use Webflow or Squarespace or Wix or, name your tool. In the same way, application development is headed in that way. Now, right now, the no-code movement is still a little bit laughed at. Why? Because people think that with no-code, there's typically no complexity. And you use it to build your MVP, but you don't build anything else with it. But I think what you're going to see in the next, I'm not even like maybe two years, even less than that, is that now people are realizing that no code does not mean no complexity. And the nuance that makes your app unique is necessary for these tools to support. So tools like Xano that allow you to not only take your idea to 90%, but go 100% are really paving a path for these other tools to come on board and say, you know what? I'm going to go beyond just the create, read, update, delete operations. I'm going to allow and empower users to build to their heart's content without limits. And I think that's what Webflow has done so well. Webflow was the first tool that really allowed designers to go to the limits with CSS control and really to build an ultra high fidelity website leveraging the power of their tools. And I think we want to do the same for the back end. And these other no-code tools are going to rise up and make this nuanced complexity available or capability available to more and more people. So you're going to see that more and more over the next couple of years.
Yeah, because for at the moment, it starts to change, but at the moment, like no-code tool, low-code tool, like no-code tool, especially, they can help you to do like 80% of your product, but then for the 20% that rest, you always need, to tinker stuff like code bit, code apart and stuff like that. And I personally do that myself, but as I can code, it's not a big problem for me. It's not a big deal, but I imagine someone that cannot code, and you have to write some code. You're completely fucked up in your development. You're like, okay, I'm stuck, and you're stuck at 80% of your product. So your product is not unique. Your product has not outstanding feature. So done. You don't have any, differentiation between the rest of the other MVPs, And,
that's right. And what makes your app unique is that last 20% that you're saying. Even though you can go 80% of the way, if everyone can go 80% of the way, then everyone's app is the same. It's that nuance, right? That uniqueness in the application that really makes your app rise to the top. And you have to be able to enable that power and creativity in the tools that you provide for people.
Yeah, it's the extra mile that makes the difference compared to anyone else.
Mm-hmm.
And okay. And, we always, if we switch back a bit into like entrepreneurship also, most of entrepreneurs, says that they've got an unfair or something like that when they launch a product, especially when they go to raise cash. They're like, okay, how unfair is that? What is your unfair? What's the unfair of Xano that will make Xano like the tool for backend, and the market leader very soon?
Yeah, so I would say that the DNA in our engineering, we have an unfair advantage because on the engineering and DevOps side, you have an engineer who was responsible or the lead DevOps for Google Photos when it was at its infancy. So unlike these other no-code tools that are typically born out of an agency and then they slap an interface on top of it, we rebuilt it from the ground up to support that scale. So that's the first thing. I think the second thing is our philosophy around design and education. As you can see, even with my background, I'm not an engineer at all. Like I would never call myself an engineer. I'm a UX designer first and foremost. So it's my job to make sure that complexity of engineering is abstracted away enough to where I can teach you, the user that's trying to build and innovate your ideas into the world. I can make sure that you understand what it is that you're doing and then remove obstacles for you to just go and do it. And so I think that very rarely do you have an engineering type company like Xano that's creating like a no-code backend that has this type of philosophy. If you look at the documentation for, tools like Firebase or Hasura or something like that, it's very, very tech driven and engineering heavy. You have to have a PhD to be able to understand all of this stuff. Whereas me, I'm trying to talk to you, like when I talk about the API, I talk about like the restaurant metaphor. Like you have a customer that places an order. You've got a waiter that takes the order from the customer and goes to the kitchen. That waiter is the API. The customer is the front end. The back end, the server and database is the kitchen, right? I break it down as simple as possible. And you'll notice that all of us try to do the same thing. So I think the unfair advantage for us is we know what it takes to build scalable applications. We have the engineering firepower to do it, and we have the user experience and the know-how to educate users, even though it's something complex, and distill it down to something really approachable.
Yeah, sure. But this is like also, like highly related, like you're speaking about like your restaurant metaphor and things like that. It's in you, like this culture of like, like explaining things very clearly and make things obvious. It's in your DNA, like I remember when we were working together, we were spending a lot of time explaining, everything to everyone, make sure that everything is obvious and everyone understood what you said. So I think it's something very important, especially when you want to build like a no-code tool.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, because so much of it is education. And this is, circling back to this, you can't expect people to just know this stuff, So I'd rather err on the side of, distilling it down too much than not distilling it down at all, which is I think that this will always be our advantage, the education and our ability to distill down complex topics.
Yeah, sure. And so what are, if you want to give like advice to people that will start their company? So I've got like two questions linked together. What are like the three main things that entrepreneurs should focus on at the early days of their company? And what are your top 3 tips for product development? If you like can link the both, I'm pretty sure you will. It will be amazing.
Yeah. So I think first and foremost, and this is something that's cliche, but I cannot emphasize enough, things that matter take time. And you might have a timeline in your head around how quickly you're going to get your product to market, how quickly it's going to get adoption, and how quickly it's going to make a difference in the world. But I promise you, it is almost always longer than you think. And that's okay, because like I said, things that matter take time. Like it just takes toiling day after day after day after day, but doing so in a way that is measured and that you are making forward progress and doing it in such a way where you're solving a real problem for a real customer that is paying you real money. So that is probably the biggest takeaway that I want every entrepreneur to know, because I just made that mistake too often, even after my startup. You just always, anything that you do, you just want it to happen so fast that you give up quickly. So things that matter take time. The second thing around, were you saying that you wanted like top 3 tools or tips for entrepreneurs?
Tips, the top 3 things that entrepreneurs should focus on in the early days of their company, and then the top 3 tips and like things that you saw and no one else saw, but product development, the 3 main things that people, if we have like the recipe to develop the product by Prakash, what it is.
Oh, these are tough. Okay. So I would say that when you are developing a product, first and foremost, map out your customer journey before you even do anything else. And I can actually, maybe you can provide it in the show notes. I will provide you a link of a really good customer journey map that basically goes all the way from the time they discover that they have a problem to finding you as the solution to what it looks like for them to be successful. Because when you're forced to do something like that before you're even building anything, you're really forced to think through your value proposition and what success is, like what that aha moment is. We call it the time to magic, when they sign up and they realize they can never live without your tool. doing the journey map really helps. So I would definitely start with that. The second thing is to be data driven. And I cannot emphasize this enough. Most people will consider data and analyzing behavior as an afterthought. There are so many tools out there, like the ones that I've mentioned in this conversation today, that make it really, really easy for you to understand what your users are doing in your product, even from the early days, that if that's not one of the things that you do right when you launch, you're making a huge mistake, because it's like you're flying blind, you know? You basically, you know, when you drive a car, everything, you have gauges on how things are doing, the oil pressure and everything. Why wouldn't you do the same thing for your
even
product,
your speed.
right? Well, why wouldn't you do the same thing for your product or your business? And the third thing is to be milestone driven and be realistic about those milestones. So whether that be a user milestone or a revenue milestone, always hold yourself accountable to moving the needle forward on what will drive your business. And that's usually revenue. Like sometimes it's user growth, but usually it's, are people paying you enough money continually? And is that number growing? Because at the end of the day, that's what's going to keep the lifeblood of your business alive and keep you moving forward and solving the problems that need to be solved in the world. So that horizontal customer journey map, the understanding of the data, and setting milestones that you are holding yourself accountable to and being honest about. So those are kind of the three things that I would recommend.
Yeah, it's also before you were speaking about discipline, it's absolutely discipline. Like hold yourself accountable, put milestone. It's kind of a discipline, you know. Yeah. And I've got so much questions that I want to ask you. But when you speak about discipline, do you, Prakash, consider yourself as like a professional athlete, kind of, you know? Like I want to be accountable and be data driven. It's a bit like, you know, like the behavior of an athlete, you know, professional athlete act like that, you know. Do you consider yourself like a professional athlete?
You know, I don't know that I consider myself a professional athlete, but I think that I definitely have a strong tendency to always want to learn from a humble place. Like I never think that I'm the expert in the room, and I always want to soak up and learn as much as possible. I think you mentioned like it's not normal for a product person to be in Google Analytics, but that just makes me that much better. And I don't think that just because I'm a product person that started out as a UX person, that started out as a visual designer, like anyone can do that. It's really about being really excited about solving a problem for users that you really care about, and using any tools necessary, any means necessary to be able to understand more of that. And the second thing that I would say is this accountability aspect of it. I think entrepreneurs oftentimes have very big visions of the world that they want to see. But I always say you should always have your head in the clouds, but your feet on the ground, which means that you are always accountable to some sense of reality, right?
Sure.
Yeah, and for sure. And then another quote that I recently heard that I love is, it's not about winning or losing, but it's about trying and learning. And that's what it's about. You're going to learn and learn. And even if you quote unquote fail, like an experiment doesn't work, guess what? It's not the end of the world. There's a new day. You just keep going. If I counted the amount of failures that we had at Xano, I mean, we would be here all night. But if you do it in a slow...
What's the biggest one? The biggest failure you guys had?
I mean, we have spent months on a product, we have this marketplace that we've launched that barely anyone uses right now. And we really thought that it was going to go to the moon when we pushed it out the door. But it's just so confusing. It's not complete. So barely anyone uses it. And we spent months of development.
You guys wanted to launch a marketplace such as the Airtable marketplace, Salesforce marketplace.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of what everyone does. Now that we have some experience behind us, I think we have a better sense of how we're going to approach it and evolve it. But again, if we hadn't launched that first version, we wouldn't have known that. I think that's, just not being afraid to learn and just put something out there, because at least you'll know hey, at least I tried that experiment, and you're going to get better over time at focusing your energy and your resources.
Yeah, sure. And maybe to finish this wonderful discussion, what's a bit the vision for Xano? Where do you want to see Xano in 10 years? where do you guys want to go? I imagine in the cloud, on the moon.
Yeah, I think that, again, as I've mentioned, like, we want to be the best no code backend. And I even want to remove the word no code. We want to be like the de facto, the best backend for the internet's applications and use cases. Like, if you have a unique business use case, then you should be coming to Xano to use it. And I remove the no code because, like, I think no code is the
new normal.
Yeah, it's just going to be normal. It's of the fashion right now. But at the end of the day, once people realize that you can do everything that you can do coding without code, why wouldn't you want to do it? Because it saves you time, it saves you money, it saves you effort, it saves you in so many different ways. So I just want people to have Xano be a household name when they're thinking about building a complex, comprehensive application, or just sprouting their ideas into the world. And right now we're just at the beginning of our journey, but I firmly believe if we continue with this education and we continue at the rate that we're going, we're going to get there.
Okay. Thanks, Prakash. Do you have something else that you want to say to the people that listens to us?
No, I mean, I'm always thrilled to be here, or kind of in a place where I can talk with a friend about the entrepreneurial journey, because it's never easy. It's something that I'm still going on, and I hope that that through listening to this, people shouldn't think like, oh, that Prakash, he's successful, because I'm still on this journey. I'm just like you, and maybe I'm a little bit further ahead because I'm months post-launch, but we're all toiling in our own way, and just to keep going and really just keep the faith and keep the discipline. So that's really all I want to say. And Morgan, thank you so much for the honor of being on this show, and I hope that I've been able to help some people today.
Thank you guys for listening to Prakash's amazing journey. From just using Photoshop and making user interfaces to becoming one of the most respected product designers at Google, Prakash has been a sponge no matter where he was. He now uses this experience to make it easy for people to build up and launch tech solutions without the need to spend years learning how to code. You need to remember one thing from this chat with Prakash. If you want to build an outstanding product, you need to be customer obsessed. How are you solving the problem for your user? What is their journey? What do they even need you? And then the key for your success is to make this whole journey a smooth experience for them. So be customer obsessed and use the data you get back to always improve your product. I hope you guys enjoyed this episode with Prakash as much as I did. Stay tuned for the next episode and don't forget to let me know what you think about it. Cheers!